very good morning to all the officials here present, all protocols observed. Firstly, I just want to convey my sincere appreciation to the DBE, Dr. Polia and Sis Lebo, and our Provincial Education Department for allowing me this opportunity to share with you our experiences in the Western Cape in terms of inclusive education and assessment through the examination process. So thank you indeed, and ladies and gentlemen, with me, by the means of introduction, I'm a DCES at the district office, and the unit that I serve is assessment and examinations. And in districts in the Western Cape, that unit resides under curriculum. And many comments were made, and particularly in the breakaways or in the commissions, that we cannot separate assessment from curriculum. But I do acknowledge that in our PEDs and the DBE that those are separate directorates. But our DCSs in the district office is at the coal face. We are at the front line of curriculum assessment and examinations. So we are the first port of call on the day when the examination is administered if there are any challenges. And we are in direct contact and relations with our principals. So, Dr. Polia, I mentioned this to you when you did an oversight visit at North, that I think it is very important that we need to share interprovincially certain practices that we can just build the system and strengthen it, and make sure that what we do as assessment coordinators, we are actually the implementers of the policy that is written at the DBE level. And if those policies are still relevant in the changing world, in the 21st century that we are moving, technology changes the world, is the policy still relevant? And the day it was issued, 2001, 2004, 2014, so I can continue. So it will be a very interesting conversation to have. But nevertheless, that's not why I'm here. Colleagues, the question that I was asked to present on might seem like a rhetorical question. Are public examinations accommodating learners with special needs? A lot has been said, and I take acknowledgement of the speakers prior to me. I think the lady from NAPTOSA mentioned some very interesting things about accommodations. And there might be certain perceptions, and I hope that the facts that I present here today will answer some of those questions and eradicate certain perceptions. But the one thing that you must also ask, it's a very sensitive matter. You will only understand the issue of accommodations more if you have a child with special needs. If you have a child that has autism or has a learning barrier, and you are concerned about your child's future. So we do acknowledge there is manipulation in the system anywhere. And the question is always asked, why are there so many accommodations in the Western Cape? I don't know. I haven't looked at the stats. But let's set the scene for taking a journey through inclusive education before we answer this question.
What does inclusive education look like in the South African context? South African law and policy says that all children should attend their local neighborhood school. This is inclusive education. Children of different races, cultures, genders, and abilities cannot be forced to attend segregated schools. Our education system does recognize that some learners require additional support in order to learn, particularly children with disabilities. In most cases, this support should be made available at the local ordinary school. This is called reasonable accommodation. Gradually, all of our ordinary schools are being converted into full-service schools. These are ordinary schools which have been provided with additional resources staff training, and support from the district to accommodate learners with higher level support needs. South Africa has not yet reached the point of full inclusion where all children, regardless of their individual support needs or disabilities, are accommodated in ordinary schools. We do still have special schools, learners who need high intensity and high frequency specialized staff, equipment, and curricula to support their learning needs attend these schools. Some special schools have been designated as resource centers, which means their teams of specialists go out to ordinary schools to train teachers and parents and also to make specialized equipment available to them. Children with severe to profound intellectual disability attend special care centers. These centers have traditionally fallen within the domain of the Department of Health, but the Department of Education is now making sure their educational needs are being met. When deciding where a learner should go to school, the best interest of the learner and wishes of the learner and parent should be taken into consideration. Removing a child from their family and community to attend a school far away should be the last resort. Support should rather be brought to the learner at the school. This means all schools should open their doors and their minds to finding creative ways in which all children in their catchment area can participate and learn together.
So colleagues, I hope that you are reminded of where the educational landscape we find ourselves in, the realities of where we are with learners with special needs. And the presentation doesn't speak about the learner's needs. I need to answer a question, Dr. Polly, you asked me. You asked me, are your public examinations, according to the regulations, accommodate these learners? And that's not an easy answer. It can be an easy answer. But let's see what is meant. These two, let's call them summaries or riddles. It's very important to understand that the accommodations that's listed here on the left still is not something that is made special for these learners to address the principles of assessment on the right. There must still be integrity. The results of those learners must be credible because they are writing the same examination. They are marked with the same marking guideline. So it's important to say we must not diminish that special needs learners are getting a better deal than those learners that are not with special needs. This is the list that is summarized, and I'll start right away. Everything that I will mediate today is based on policy. Nothing personal. That is also the message when we advocate. We must stay within the framework of the regulations and the policy. So what underpins the policies in relation to learners with special needs when it comes to public examinations? The first one where it started is the Education White Paper 6. And there it confirms that learners have barriers, and it categorizes the barriers. And the CIAS process, which was recently promulgated in 2014, is something that we have to tackle a little bit more. The CIAS process confirms that learners do have learning barriers and how to deal with that barriers. Another policy is the procedural manual for the assessment of learners, and this is a manual that was released in 2016 from the Basic Education Department. Not many officials are familiar with this particular manual. The next one, in the Western Cape, we do have a policy on the training of readers and scribes, because there's also a perception that certain learners or candidates get a specific reader that they are familiar with, and that the scribes are not trained. So this is a document that is used to train our readers and scribes, and it provides clear guidelines to ensure that there's integrity when it comes to reading and scribing. Now, important, going back to the CIA's policy. The CIA's policy also relates or references a lot of other policies, as you can see there, and I'm not going to go through all of them. So it is not something that was done or developed in a jiffy. All these acts and policies were taken into account to develop the CIA's policy to ensure that this process of screening, identification, assessment, and support is going to work in the system. But all those policies I've just highlighted now is separate from where we as the administrators of exams, or you as the administrators of the public exams, right, in the national policy pertaining to the conduct, administration and management of the NEC exams, page 102, Annex A, there it clearly stipulates every accommodation. So, the public or the regulations make provision to accommodate learners with special needs. And I'm going to share the categories with you. But there's one thing that a lot of people, officials, are confused, or they speak about in terms of, or except for accommodations, they refer to concessions. So there's a huge difference between the two. So here I'm just going to in this definition. A concession refers to an act or instance of conceding, granting, or relaxing. An example, here's an example of immigrant. But I'm going to use another example that many assessment practitioners are not applying. When a learner in the GET or in the FET is diagnosed with a special learning disorder, that learner do not have to obtain 50% in his home language. That learner needs to obtain at least 40% in one of the official languages, and it includes FAL. And such a learner then have to obtain 30% in the other language. Now, how do I know that, Mr. Visaki, is when we get appeals and there is clear evidence that the learner was diagnosed with a special learning disorder, the schools do not necessarily apply the concession. The concession here is to relax the progression or promotion requirement. In the FET, exactly the same. You need to obtain 40% in your home language. But if you are diagnosed with aphasia, dyslexia, or any form of learning or language barrier, that concession apply. But when it speaks about an accommodation, there are changes in procedures, or we're using tools that provide equal access to instruction and assessment. You can't use the reader and scribe only at the NSC level. You can't use an assistive device only at the final or end examination. That is the device that you need to train and you need to learn with it. So it is a tool. It's something additional. So just to clarify for those perhaps who might also not have known the difference between the two. So our language usage in assessment and examination, we have a vocabulary rich. We speak assessment language. That's why we must be absolutely politically correct. Now, the rationale for the assessment accommodations within the inclusive framework, it says very clear. All aspects of the curriculum, including what is taught, how it is taught and assessed, should be accessible to all learners. We therefore want to enable all learners to participate actively in the educational process and achieve effectively. We want to enable learners who experience barriers to learning to demonstrate their true ability in assessment. We want to provide learners with a fair chance to achieve scholastic success. I just want to pause there for a moment. When I deal on a regular basis with parents that would urge the department to provide an accommodation or concession to a learner. And here's one example, dyscalculia. Now, Doc, there are parents where the learners are diagnosed with dyscalculia. There's no concession in the GET. There is a concession in the FET where you can choose another subject or offer another subject in lieu of maths or math lit. But now they want to go one step further. If the learner is offering geography and there are calculations in geography, they want to ask now about where are you going, you are disadvantaging my learner or my child, Dr. Simalani. We want also a further concession. And then it means it requires a conversation. To say if your child is leaving school and you send him to the shop to buy groceries, how will he be able to calculate the basic things and if he have enough money to pay for the groceries or something to that extent? We should not only focus on getting the learners the accommodation to finish matric. The question should always be what happens beyond with that learner. It brings me to the conversation of the endorsed matric, Dr. Simalani, which created a stir somehow. We, and my personal view, there is a policy for endorsed, so no doubt about it. But that is a qualification that we say to school practitioners, you should not even go that way. If the parent inquires about the last resort, we don't say to that parent that the learner only write 5 subjects or offer 5 subjects. Let that learner offer 7, write 7, and then at the last resort, at resulting, a decision can be made. It's an inferior, it's no qualification whatsoever. But the policymakers put it in there, so we have to advise accordingly. Eligibility of assessment accommodations. Who are eligible? Because there is this perception everybody can go to a psychologist, get a report, and then a recommendation is made for extra time. Those who experience barriers to learning arising from a disability, a learning difficulty, a learning disability, or behavior or psychosocial disorder, which prevent them from achieving according to their potential during assessment. Or learners who during the assessment or examination period experience medical, social, emotional challenges and who have addressed a direct submission, in our case, to the Western Cape. So these are more your emergency accommodations. Learner was an accident, there's trauma, so on an ad hoc basis. This is where accommodations will not be considered. Assessment accommodations will not be granted where the primary area of difficulties is with the language of learning and teaching, and assessment due to the fact that the said language is not the home language of the learner. So we often find this, and I have spoken to Dr. Simalani, this is something that needs to be addressed. The learners coming from other provinces, for example, I'm using the Eastern Cape, they are moving to the Western Cape in numbers, but they've offered isiXhosa home language. and English fell. Our province are not yet accommodating or do not have trained teachers in many of our schools for those learners. They are not immigrants. So now they perform very well in all their subjects except Afrikaans fell, because they are forced to offer Afrikaans fell. That school doesn't offer any other alternative, which means that learner will not achieve 40%. The question that you must ask, is that fair? Should the learner repeat the whole year just because there was a switch between the languages? So something in policy that needs some attention. We cannot use accommodations to enhance scholastic performance, which we have found a couple of years ago. Scores of matric learners have for the first time applied for accommodation for extra time. But those are the learners who have 80% and above. There's clear manipulation or clear, what shall we say, taking advantage. But that the policy has made in the Western Cape, and I cannot speak about others, it's clear there must be a history. That the history doesn't only start in grade 10. So we will look at the processes shortly. Accommodation will not be eligible where there is no record of SBST, or school-based support team support. Here's a list of accommodations, and I'm not going to bore you with you be able to read this. But I think the one that stands out more is additional time. In some cases, readers and scribes, and more and more technology replaces the readers, where we have the reading pen, or you have what we call the exam portal, where learners sit in front of a computer with a headset, and then there is a voice that reads the questions. Now, I'm not going to unpack this. I'm just giving you a sense for the sake of referencing, because these are presentations that will be shared to everybody. In the Western Cape, we regularly bring out minutes. And one of the minutes, we have guidelines, and we give advice to schools how to manage with the accommodations provided, what should be done. So for example, we know that the DBE prepares enlarged print and braille papers, and also enlarged print and braille papers. Here, for example, computer voice to text. What are the possible barriers, right? Who are the learners that can fall in this category? But on the right hand, you will find what is the guideline that we provide to the schools in terms of how do they need to manage this accommodation. So I'm not going to unpack this. For the readers and scribes, we want to say all readers and scribes must be trained. There must be a certificate. It cannot be somebody that the candidate is familiar with. And that's it there. Now, you attended, Dr. Polya and your NEAC team, a Lekgotla in 2020 in the Western Cape, where one of the items that was presented by Mr. Chasford Arends on assistive devices. And during that Lekgotla, there was an interesting statistic in terms of performance of learners in special schools. So during the 2019 examination, 92% of learners at special schools have achieved the National Senior Certificate. It's amazing, isn't it? Well, we don't want to brag about it, we just want to make a point. Right? Because they are not individual assessment, it's not normal public ordinary schools, it's special schools. Special schools that accommodate learners in a special way. And just to show you the percentage there, and just as a fact. This brings me to a special case. And I'm sure Mr. Lauriston will be proud, he didn't know this, that I will bring this learner to you as an example where the public examinations accommodate learners. This learner, he was diagnosed with apraxia of speech. He cannot talk. He cannot use his wrist to write, right? So he cannot write unassisted. Look what he's writing post the exam. I am a complicated phenomenon. People are often surprised when they see or hear about me. This is because I do not fit in. I stand out from everyone else because of a multitude of reasons, many of which people find difficult to understand. I can't speak fluently. It's like hating a book just because the cover is dirty. I have so much love and knowledge. My shell is just a little dirty. So let me show you what it does. And there's a video. I hope people open, gentlemen. If it's not going to open, I will be disappointed. Okay, okay. And that's extra 1 minute.
Don't worry, don't worry. You are covered with the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sam. Is he going to open? Okay, there we go. It doesn't show on my side. I don't want to waste time.
No, don't stay. This deserves the time we think.
Okay, let's go to the folder. I can open the folder. Frans, just open that folder, Luca. There we go. Okay, now the video. Yeah, that video. It doesn't need sound, it's fine. Just open it. Okay, it's fine. While they are working on it, I'm just going to show you something that can open.
Yeah, I'm going to allow this, colleagues.
Okay.
I think our SME learners deserves this.
Okay, so it doesn't show here, so you guys can work on that so long. I can come back at the end, Mr. Nkosinathi.
There we go, there we go.
Oh, okay, good. So look at the actions. Look at the atmosphere in which the exam paper is written by Luca. Somebody needs to hold his wrist. Now in that exam room, and we have done, look at the resource that it drew. SNE assessment, the chief director of exams, we visited and we observed Luca. And in that little room, you'll find one, the personal assistant. But this learner writes on A4 pages only 2 or 3 or 4 words, 5 to 6 words. Then there's a scribe. As he then continue, the scribe put it in a normal exam book. You know, scribe it in a normal book. Now imagine yourself, how many pages is he ready for history and for languages?